for change. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And neither will Labour or Fine Gael agree to change because they like it the way it is. And they have brass necks that you could only dream about. I mean, they introduced a salary cap for their own advisors of 92,000. And then Kenny comes along and gives 124 to his fella. And Brendan Howland says he spent 2 months trying to convince him otherwise. And then Brendan Howland gives 130 to his fella. I mean, there is no fairness, and there isn't going to be fairness until things are done differently. Things will not be done differently until the ordinary people of Ireland insist that they are done so, and don't wait for the next election. It is very encouraging that huge crowds are starting to turn out for these meetings. That's the start. And irrespective of how this one ends up being, supposing we don't win, supposing that not enough people refuse to sign up, because we do need the numbers to refuse. If we're going to make life difficult for the government, enough people have to refuse to sign up for this household charge. If you sign up for this, you're going to be cut for the water charges as well, you're going to be cut for the septic tank business. And God knows what else is coming down the tracks. The very fact that we can oppose this, you have a say for the first time. They put the VAT from 23% from 21 to 23%. It affects those on lower incomes 16% in their spending power. It affects those on higher incomes by 6%. There is no fairness in it, but you had no say in whether you pay 21 or 23% VAT. This time you have a say. You can make a stand and say enough is enough, and there's only so much misery you can throw at us. I'll let Claire have your word.
Seats up the front if people want to take them. I have to get off this stool or I feel like I have to sing a song, and I couldn't subject you to that. I think people will be a bit more comfortable if they sat in. I'm sure people have better things to be doing with their Saturday nights, and it is an indictment of this government, the fact that you've had to leave your houses to come out for a meeting on a night that people should be spending with their families and enjoying themselves. But I think it is a sign of the times. Now, like Mick, I'm one of 9 TDs who have come out and said that we will not be paying this household tax, and we would encourage other people to do the same, because we think that that's the only way in which this injustice can be defeated. And like Mick said, this is not about €100. If you look at the form that is in the local authorities for the household tax, it makes it quite clear. They want to know about your property, they want to know about your water supply. And this is the first step, that they want you to give them as much information as possible about your home and your circumstances, so that they can bring in a whole new tier of local taxation, which will see your home tax upwards of about €600 to €800 a year, and water taxes of about €400 a year. Now, that's not scaremongering, that's factual information put out by the government, which they plan to implement by 2014. They want all of us paying the equivalent of over €1,000 a year at that time. So there is an enormous amount at stake in this issue, particularly when you see so many families who can't make ends meet, so many people struggling to pay their mortgages already. This really is the last straw. And it is, as Mick says, has nothing got to do with local services. Now, the government, in the course of the last week, initiated an advertising campaign saying pay your €100, support your local services. That is a complete and utter lie. As Mick said, the council budgets have been cut, and next Wednesday, 1.25 billion of our taxes that we've all paid in our VAT, our carbon taxes, our income taxes, and all of the other things will be handed over to an unsecured bondholder in Anglo-Irish Bank. And that's the reality of it. That's where all of this money is going. That's why the austerity is being pushed. And it is very much a case of enough is enough. Now, I just want to deal with some of the practicalities of the issue, who's eligible, what happens if you don't pay, what sort of a campaign is necessary, that type of thing. And then this should be very much a working meeting where it's open to the floor and people ask whatever questions are on their minds. Firstly, I suppose the overwhelming majority of households are eligible to pay this tax. 86% of householders. The only exemptions from it are tenants in local authority houses, people in receipt of mortgage interest supplement, but that's a very small number of people, less than 20,000, and they changed the rules in the recent budget, which means you have to wait a year before you get that, so hardly anybody benefits from that. And then a number of people in unfinished or ghost estates, but that's only about 200,000 households out of 1.8 million. But if there is anybody here in those categories, we would say that you also are still affected, because they still want you to go online, they still want you to give them all your personal details, sign up to it and tell them that you're not eligible. So they want you to be part of it, and you're covered by the non-registration thing as well. So really this issue affects everybody. If you're a pensioner who's bought out your council house, you have to pay. If you're somebody who's on social welfare, you have to pay €100. And of course, if you're a millionaire tax exile who has a property here, you have to pay the same amount as people who are already struggling. It's an absolute disgrace, but that's the way it is. A couple of other factual things I think are very important. The government and the newspapers have put out this spin that they can take the money from your social welfare or your wages. And this has been put out to try and demoralise people, make people think that, well, there's no point in us fighting, they're going to get us in the end anyway. Completely and utterly not true. They cannot take this money from your wages, they cannot take this money from your social welfare. What is being spoken about is a change in legislation whereby court fines that remain unpaid could be taken from your wages or social welfare, and that's because, you know yourselves, people have ended up refusing to pay their TV licence or park and fine. A few people have ended up in prison, very expensive and all the rest of it. So that was being looked at anyway. But that is not in place yet, and even if it was, it's only to deal with the fine bit, nothing to do with the household tax itself. So that is an important point, I think, to register. So what happens next, I suppose? What the campaign is saying, we believe that appeals to the better nature of politicians is not going to work on this one. A, because they don't have a better nature, and B, because we tried already and they weren't listening. This legislation went through and they didn't care less. The government rammed it through with their majority. So the only way we can defeat this is by building a campaign of civil disobedience and non-payment, the way they did in Britain in the poll tax, which ultimately brought down Margaret Thatcher, and the way we did in Dublin in the 1990s with the anti-water charges campaign, which forced the abolition of water charges for the whole country. So there is history on this issue. It's been done before. It's been proven that if enough people stand together, then the problem is not for us, the problem is for the government, because there's a hell of a lot more of us than there is of them. And I think people should take great heart from the meetings that have been held across the board. The meeting in Wexford Town the other night, absolutely powerful, well over 300 people, over 100 people in Gorey, meetings planned in Enniscorthy, Carclough and all over the place, not to mind every inch of Donegal, Dublin, Cork and all the counties in between over the next number of weeks. We want to build an army of people who refuse to register for this tax, and I think the signs are very, very good. And we will be encouraging everybody here to make that stand with us. And the first thing we'd say is that there are absolutely no penalties at all. The government are going to be trying to, on the one hand, trying to say, oh, everyone's paying this. If you don't pay this, you're going to be left on your own. And then they'll be saying, and if you don't pay, you're going to get into shock and trouble, so you better well cough up now. On the everybody's paying argument, they've kind of gone a bit quiet on that. They've moved. They used to be doing a kind of a daily score sheet. Now you don't hear about it so much. Now they talk about money, trying to make it seem better than it is. The reality is, with almost the first month finished, 97.5% of people still have not registered for this tax. Now that isn't even... That isn't even the government and their friends, let's face it, or their immediate family, so they're way behind on that one, you know. But that said, we do know as the deadline gets nearer, more people will register and the intimidation will step up. But first things first, absolutely